Welcome to Whisperwood Stories. Today, we read 3 stories from r/creepyencounters. The following stories may contain content that is disturbing to certain viewers. Listener discretion is advised. Let's begin. Our first story is from JustAnotherMisfitToy. Stranger danger is real, even in college. During junior year of college, this random guy approached me and a friend working a booth at an activities fair and asked us to help him get in contact with this buddy of his that he was supposed to go camping with. Mind you, this was winter in New Hampshire, so really cold, so it was already starting to sound sketchy. Not only was the guy not a student at my university, but he didn't even know the name of this guy that he was supposed to go camping with, nor did he know the phone number. He said something to the effect of, "Oh, I was supposed to pick him up this morning and give him and his girlfriend a ride to the campsite, but she's not picking up her phone, so can you help me find them?" He kind of knew her name, kept saying it was something like this name or something like another name. I was mad creeped out, but pretended to help nonetheless, as my friend seemed to be okay. He tried guessing the name of this male friend, but all the info he really had was the girl's name. His main goal in all of it was to figure out where he could find these people. He said he was trying to get into a building where he thought that they were, and he couldn't because it was locked. You cannot get into the residence halls on my campus without a student ID. He even hinted that he was hoping one of us could help him get into the building, and we just shrugged it off with, "Oh, we wish we could be more help, but we're stuck here until 2 p.m. After we failed to help him, we directed him towards the dining hall, because we had no idea where else to send him. And he walked out of the building, and my friend and I looked at each other, and we're both like, "Did you get freaked out by him too?" I firmly believe that he was an abusive/jealous ex trying to find out where his ex-girlfriend and new boyfriend were. I really try not to judge someone before I know them, but something really just wasn't right with him, you know. P.S. This guy was 100% the Ted Bundy type. He had piercing turquoise blue eyes and very handsome, had charming mannerisms, and a striking jawline. Our second story is from Slum. Trotter's Eyes. When I was around 5 years old, something happened to me that I will never forget. In retrospect, this was my first real encounter with mental illness and addiction. Also looking back, I don't know why the hell my parents thought this was okay in the first place. My parents had me when they were both 25 years old, so this took place when they were around 30. As a 26-year-old man now, I have no idea what was going through their minds when they let a sick man into our house. His name was Trotter. That's what I remember. I don't really remember his face or anything appealing about him, but I know they called him Trotter. I believe it was his last name, but I'm not sure. This man, whom I had never seen before, was apparently an old friend of my parents. You see, at the time we lived on the outskirts of Texas, practically in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was still a 15-minute drive, and our house was the only one for miles. I'm not quite sure how Trotter knew where we lived, considering that I had never seen him before. But maybe it wasn't a coincidence. All I know is that it made this screwed up encounter even more strange for me. Anyways, one night, he shows up at our door. I remember hearing the doorbell and seeing a puzzled look on both of my parents' faces, because we didn't have any neighbors, and the state park was closed. I remember my dad walking to the door and looking through the peephole and mouthing to my mom what I now assume was, "It's Trotter." They were both obviously on edge, as if they knew something about this guy that I didn't. They let him in, and he exclaimed that he needed a place to stay for the night because of how cold it was. Was he homeless? I have no idea, and I wish I could ask my parents now. My dad passed away last year, and my mom is a raging alcoholic. This night is forever etched into my mind, because shortly after he showed up, it was my bedtime. I was an only child, but my parents let me have a bunk bed because I thought it was so cool to sleep up top, so I went to bed as normal. Do you remember having a bunk bed when you were a kid? Did you ever lay on the bottom bunk, put your feet up between the bars of the top bunk and push on the mattress? I used to do that all the time as a kid. The only reason I'm mentioning this is because I woke up in the middle of the night to my mattress being fooled around with from underneath. I had no earthly idea what was going on, because I obviously didn't think that there was anyone on the bottom bunk considering that I was only a child. There was a star-shaped nightlight that I had on the wall, so I hung my head over the side of my bunk to see if I could see what was going on. I remember it still being super dark, so I had to try and have my eyes adjust once I was looking upside down on the bottom bunk. After a few seconds, my eyes focused, and I noticed this man was laying on the bottom mattress, smiling at me. I came back up and thought to myself how they didn't tell me he was going to be sleeping on my bed and not the couch. It was definitely weird, but I ignored it and went back to sleep, only to be awoken again by Trotter. Except this time, when I opened my eyes, I was basically face to face with him. Once he noticed that I was awake, he grabbed my shoulders and started vigorously shaking me. He kept saying over and over and over, "You've got to help me. You've got to help me. You have got to help me." Now, as if this wasn't absolutely terrifying enough in itself for a 5-year-old boy, what really haunts me to this day was the look on his face. Pale, sheet white and stricken with terror is the only way I know how to describe it. Like he had just seen something that humans are not supposed to witness. His eyes were impossibly wide open, wide enough to fall in, it seemed like. Of course, I start screaming and crying hysterically, and my dad swings open the door only to see his friend shaking me like a rag doll. Trotter turns around and drops me off the bed onto the floor, and in a split second my dad tackles him and starts shaking him uncontrollably. I ran into my mom's room, and everything after that is a little bit fuzzy, I'm assuming because of trauma, and the 21 years that have transpired since. All I know for certain is that I never saw him again in person. I was told a little later on that he suffered from schizophrenia, and that he was on drugs pretty heavily at the time. Why he was sleeping on my bed, though, is beyond me. Every once in a blue moon, I wake up in a cold sweat because I have such vivid dreams of Trotter's eyes. Our last story is from Liquid Pen Chamber. Creeper in the Woods. When I was about 9 years old, this would have been in the early 90s, my family and I lived in a house with a fairly big wooded area behind our backyard. I say fairly big because it wasn't big enough that you could really get lost in it for very long. But it was big enough that you could walk into it for a good 20 minutes before making it to the center. It got pretty thick in some areas, and you couldn't see any of the houses from the neighborhoods once inside. To my friends and I, it was a magical world. We played in those woods all summer long. My mom would let us go in there as long as we were back before sundown. Like I said, this was the early 90s, and times were a little different then. My best friend would come over, and we would run out there and play for hours. We played hide and seek, Army, Star Wars, and anything we could think of. But our favorite thing to do was climb trees. We had a favorite tree to climb. It was a huge pine out towards the middle of the woods. The branches at the bottom were low enough that we could grab on and pull ourselves up, and the branches leading up were all very strong, and we could climb really high to see a view from above most of the other trees. Sometimes, when I got bored at home, I'd go out there by myself. I'd climb real high in that tree and just think about stuff. I loved being way up there. It was so peaceful and calm. One Sunday, I decided to go out on a solo mission in the evening. I know I didn't have too long before dark, so I hurried into the woods to get in a good climb. I was up in my spot in no time. I remember it was late summer, and the weather was still warm late into the evening. I wanted to be able to see just a little bit of the sunset, and then I'd climb down and hurry home. I just sat up there and daydreamed as I waited for the sun to begin to set. Then, I heard a twig snap on the ground, and I looked straight down. I saw a man standing there at the base of the tree, looking up at me. I remember he was wearing a filthy brown jacket, and he had a patchy beard. His hair was sticking up at random places, looking like he had been relentlessly running his fingers through it. He was just staring at me, with a bizarre expression that seemed to be one of wonder and delight. It was an extremely unnerving look, almost a look of someone that just realized they had stumbled across gold at the end of a rainbow. That's the only way I can describe it. It made my blood run cold. I went completely numb, like ice had been injected into my veins. I didn't know how long he'd been there watching me before I noticed him. Thinking about that still makes me shiver. We just stared at each other for a moment. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. It sounds strange, but I didn't want to scream or tell him to go away, because I had this feeling that told me not to provoke him in any way. After a few minutes, he spoke. "Are you coming down anytime soon?" I shook my head back and forth. I didn't know what to say to him. It was clear that I was very uncomfortable at this point, and that should be enough to make a decent person go away. But he only grinned at me. Then, he reached up his hand and grabbed the bottom branch of the tree, as if to test it to see if it could hold him. I do believe that he may have been planning to climb up to me, but the lowest branch was flimsy. It was not strong enough to hold a grown adult. I thank God for that. He soon realized this and gave up, but I had seen enough. I finally broke my silence and started to yell for someone to help me. I kept screaming and screaming. The man backed away a step or two from the tree and began to mumble a curse under his breath. He flailed his arms in the air in a rage and began making a motion like he was pushing an invisible person in front of him. Eventually he turned and walked away, sort of stumbling with each step. I don't think anybody heard my cries, because nobody came to help me. I stayed up in that tree for what felt like hours because I wasn't sure if he was really gone. Finally, I climbed down because the sun was beginning to set, and I couldn't bear to be out there at night. I hit the ground and bolted back to my house, positive that he would pop out from a shadow and grab me. He never did. I made it home and told my parents. My dad went out to look in the woods, but he never saw anyone. We stayed in the house for about another 2 years before we moved across to a bigger house. I never played in those woods again for the rest of our time there. I still think about that man sometimes. What would he have done if I had come down? I have no idea. But that question does keep me up some nights. Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. The stories in this video were read and slightly altered with the author's permissions. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit posts. Don't let the shadows get too close.